Angelica. It's so good to see you. I'm so happy that you're able to join me here today.
Good afternoon, Dr. Farrell. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Awesome. So, for those of you viewing, you know that this is Around the World. I'm back with Dr. Alice Farrell. And as I've mentioned on my YouTube channel, I will be putting information out that speaks to and add to the literature around race relations, diversity, equity, inclusion, among other topics. And we are celebrating social workers. We are lifting up those powerful individuals in our communities. We are lifting up women in their diverse roles. And so I'm so glad that Angelica, who is a licensed clinical social worker and who is with us from the state of Massachusetts, we're going to celebrate her work, celebrate her in all that she does in the community as a parent, as an advocate, celebrate her in terms of her thoughts about how to put down in writing her ideas through her poetry, through her spoken words, and all that we're going to discuss in a little bit. So, Angelica, I know that there are a few questions that I'd like to ask, but first, let's start with you just telling the viewers some things about yourself.
Okay. Well, thank you for this opportunity. It's a pleasure to talk to you and all of those. And when I think of myself, it's an ongoing journey, but it really comes down to I'm a person who loves people. I am a person who is excited to know more about the world and different viewpoints of others. It's almost like I studied ethnography in my undergrad, which is a different form of research rather than just focusing on statistics, but being a person who gathers stories as a form of showing and demonstrating our own worldviews and our own kind of paths and footsteps. So I am a woman. I am a social worker. I am a mom. I'm an educator, but I'm also a student every day. And being a student, I have to say, is one of my favorite things because learning from one another across roles, across race, across class, across the spaces that exist has been the true gift of life for me. And that's who I am.
Wonderful, wonderful. And you just brought me right into that piece of ethnography and the idea of doing research, but doing it in such a way that you're actually part of the community. You're in there and you're gathering stories and so forth. And I had an opportunity to watch a video clip that you sent to me on time. And it was powerful. And I really would like for you to share a little bit about that video clip.
So, I always speak of when I've learned in my studies as well, my professional studies, but then, combining that with who I am because it's experiential and educational for me. It's this idea of space and time and how we embody across space and time various intersections of that. But what is captured of our experiences? What is captured across space and time? Who are we learning from? Who are our educators? And really that piece there that I created had two pieces. It was twofold. Not just the wording of the time is now to become your voice, to raise your voice and give your lenses and opinions, but it's really looking at the deep rooted our ancestors and the educators that we have outside of labels and roles. And we go, and one of the things I end with is saying from this place to finding our own spaces, right? Because oftentimes there's this word that comes to mind. We can feel very derelict in our own home countries and estranged from the rhetoric of the dominant, right? And so this poem is really about the visuals and what I decided to write. And so I captured various pieces from the beginning of time to the end. It's that we have treasures. We're not just generational trauma, but we come from kings and queens. We come from treasures from silver and gold, and how we seek our wealth in various ways, outside of what the capitalist society may say.
Now, Angelica, I couldn't have summed it up better. It's your writing and it's your publication out there. It's so beautiful, so powerful, because as you said, it lifted up And when I was watching a piece of it, it had like you're traveling on the seas, traveling on the seas. And then there's a component that had to do with within us, deep within us, the root of our ancestors. And that piece just pulled at me. And then I'm looking and I say, wow. And then you had some strong figures that represented there. I'm thinking Malcolm X, right? As imagery there. And then you proceeded to speak again, just going back and forward about the gold, the richness, who we are, our ancestry. And then you put ancestral, divine. And it was such a blending of where we are right now. You mentioned the fact that when we think about our ancestry, it's not all about generational trauma. There is that, and I've mentioned it many times, the beauty, the power, the richness, the diversity, the knowledge, our legacy that we're carrying, and how it's connected to those who came before us. So I thought that was powerful. And I can't help but ask you to now speak about the other one that you did. Just talk to us
Oh.
about that, Angelica.
So interesting. Woman of color is like I refer to as like my little mini Maya Angelou piece, right? This was something. Oftentimes when I write from a place of there's something happening, and I have to create something. I have to create a product that can capture it. Woman of color, professional social worker. This is a call onto you. I wrote that in 2018, ma'am, during a time where I myself was observing as a professional social worker within the Department of Children and Families how I viewed, because I like to look inward first, because being a practitioner and both a human is very similar for me. I cannot practice what I am not. And I'm trying to get that message out of this is who I am as well, but I work within my communities. They look like me. I see human beings. And sometimes our families are driven to welfare, to states of they're shifted into more boxes rather than liberated and empowered. And empowerment means that you give people tools and together we create the next steps of well-being. And Woman of Colors was written for my colleagues that I work with and also other social workers out there that I see getting a different message. And that sometimes we get oversought for promotions. Sometimes we're being watched to get that one wrong move, and it really becomes an oppressive space at times that we're working in because we're not making reactive decisions, nor are we working under a design that's been created not to service the families we have. And therefore, it was a piece to remind my Latinas, my Africanas, my women of all shades, right, who live to change and sustain social change, and to just say, here we are, here I am. Let's continue doing what we're doing, because sometimes when you're doing the right thing and it's not part of that greater rhetoric again, you get resistance. And the resistance is, while it's difficult, if we don't, I like the quote that says, a temptation isn't a temptation till you're confronted with it and you overcome. Same thing with our circumstances in these spaces. It's not that I want to eliminate difficulty, it's how I'm going to navigate difficulty or conversation, and what imprint am I going to leave in a conversation about a child being in their home or a family dynamic, and does that represent what I truly embody from a social justice and human rights perspective, or am I following the lead of others that have been programmed to act without seeing the human being? And so I have noticed that there is this, I play many roles in my job, and it can be exhausting because those roles are an advocate for self. So I can continue speaking from a place of justice, a place of well-being and community building, and not always looking and pathologizing families in a field that often feels is predominated by that.
Wonderful. I am thinking about the aspect of that particular piece of work where you said, keep on fighting, strategizing, your character, value yourself.
The world is yours.
Ooh, you said it. You said it. You said your voice are lifted up. The world is mine. And it's like you're speaking to us. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. And so I'm gravitating toward that. When you're telling us we have the power to be and represent and let our voices be heard, especially because we're in spaces where we can bring the voices of others who are not able to be in those spaces where decisions are being made,
Yes.
practices are being designed, policies are being developed, and we can bring those voices in. At the same time, we're encouraging others by what you say, giving the tools, coming alongside them so they themselves can be empowered and have their own voice and their own platform.
Yes,
How
and when you speak in these spaces, I bet, right? It's like our strength is felt doubled. Our strength is felt with in a way that is powerful and moving, which sometimes that fragility that we speak about lately can be reactive to that. And it's no, this strength, don't let a policy be weaponized. Let a policy be an open access.
Hmm. That is awesome. That is awesome. And I think just to wrap it, and I'm hoping that you're able to get that piece of work, both of them, out there on the platform so others can hear. Because there's an aspect of it where you speak to those who are actually maintaining institutional racism and disparities and are promoting the inequities, and you actually speak to them. You speak about the humanity, and then you speak about the fact that about harmonizing, and there's so much that you pull in, and then you wrap it up with this piece here regarding the time is now, but you said that me as a Black woman, you're where you are, so we're connected. It's as if you're saying that you're thanking us as individuals because we're part of you and you're part of us. Can you speak to a little bit about that, what you're saying to the folks who are oppressing others, and then the piece about we're connected?
So even as I hear you speaking of it, I'm smiling because I say to those individuals and systems, powers that be, right? If you don't get connected with us right now and these voices of change, you will be the catalyst to end humanity. It's that serious. And then I conclude that with taking a pause and say there's one more thing I'd like to say. Woman of color, thank you. Thank you, because you're the greatest part of me.
Mm.
And I wrote that because I do find, I believe in the Ubuntu African proverb. Ubuntu is something I like to use a lot, and I would close a lot of my emails with Ubuntu. I am because you are. And when you are in your fullest self, when you are in your freest self, when you are speaking your truest knowledge, which is gained from many places, you allow me to be me. And together, that's powerful, because it does change the dominant rhetorics in society. It goes across political, social, class. I want to hear from women all over the world that are, taking on different roles and tasks, and that truly know what it means to be in the human journey, not just in the structured schedule. And so I am grateful for my women of color, for my women everywhere, that as Audre Lorde speaks about, it's our silence will deteriorate us more than actually taking the step and dare to say something that you feel at that time. And I'm grateful for everyone, such as you, Alistair. Your spoken word to me, your reflections when you hear my stuff, that is empowering, because I know that we're sharing genuine moments that are coming with intentions. It's a biopsychosocial engagement with our environment. And that's where I speak of, you can't be something and then practice another. If you're not in alignment, right, with what the intended and unintended consequences of what is going to happen, then you're missing out on something. And I find that in my alignment comes from my sisters.
Wow, wow, powerful, powerful. And during a time again when we're celebrating women in all of our different roles and in all of our different positions and places that we exist. So I know that you were also a lecturer, and I saw that piece. I loved it, race relations, and the fact that you spoke about hybrid teaching that has to do with bringing in theory and practice and all of that to your students across social work in terms of wherever they are in their process. Can you speak a little bit about that experience that you had?
Absolutely. So I did start teaching for Western New England University a few years ago, and I taught there for 5 years. And I'm going to give you a little bit of the backstory, right? Since stories are good. I was actually at a training through the Department of Children and Families, and I met this amazing Latina woman. Her name was Lynette, and she came to me at lunchtime because I'm a speaker, so I'm always speaking my mind, not really even understanding what's happening everywhere else, but contributing to what should be a mosaic of a dialogue, right? So it is who I am. I talk a ton, and she came to me and she goes, I hope you're gonna get your PhD one day. And I'm like, oh, it's so expensive. And she says, no, you have a lot to say, and kind of just recognized it. And as she was leaving a few months later, we ended up networking together, and I'm connecting. um, as she was leaving her position, she recommended me, unbeknownst to myself, to teach a class which was empowerment practices in working with vulnerable populations. And I was like, that is right down my alley. Like, what better fit? Yes, I would love to. I had not done it before, but I was both excited and humbled to know that I can contribute to planting seeds in this topic, and in this course that was not an elective but a very much a part of the main course towards social work students. And so I had to cover in that class across intersecting identities, whether it be homelessness and being a veteran, being a woman, being a male, LGBTQ, gender and sexualities. It had a subject matter at every given lesson. And what I would do is, in order, because I have to make material real to me. I don't want to just learn it. I would bring in stories and speakers that either I was familiar with or I would be told about. And one of the women I brought in is one who worked with me at the Department of Children and Families and had a master's, but her story of being homeless and how she ended up becoming a master level social worker. I thought that was impactful. Or
Yeah.
a woman combat veteran to come in and speak. What were your stories and experiences, both good and both very difficult, within the Army? And so I wanted to bring the students the experiential and the intellectual pieces. And I would use current law to talk about, such as stop and frisk, and really peel away at what things that we may talk about, but what do they do and what is their impact on the people you're going to serve. And for the most part, the students would respond well to that. It was a different presentation, but it was through a lot of storytelling as well, that I tried to get the information out and to create critical thought of what exists and what impact is it having, and what can we do then if it's not having a positive impact.
Beautiful and powerful. I can only imagine sitting in your classes. So let's touch on this just for a bit, because in addition to you putting in the seed, so to speak, in this very important piece of work, you're also simultaneously doing work around collaboration. I see a lot in your work around cross collaboration, cross systems collaboration, children and families, juvenile justice, child welfare, juvenile justice, law enforcement. And also, I saw some elements around data analysts, and just your work. It's so broad and yet so targeted. So, I'd love for you to lift up for us what are some of the essential components to cross sector, cross system collaboration, which is essential to this work that needs to be done as we are social workers and others in the field. If you can speak to that.
Absolutely. um, I began at the Department of Children and Families when I was 22 years old, right out of undergrad. I really didn't know what I was getting into as a department and as an evolving young person in terms of the systemic piece and bureaucracies. But it did expose me to working with many other stakeholders in the communities and many other areas, intersectionally. What I can say to this is that I have both been blessed to be an observer of how systems can all interact to continue the cycles of oppression, or you can take advantage. And when you have opportunities, such as when I do trainings to the schools, when I do trainings at the courts on what it means to be a mandated reporter, how you bring the information in and begin to shift what the practice is by giving them examples of communication, of what's being translated when you're sending a report to my office, how it could be interpreted. What information are we giving each other? And what, again, what purpose, common purpose is this serving to move along populations and communities that we are serving? I'm a huge believer that my job is to service the people. I am a servant first. I am not there because while we talk about power dynamics and I'm aware what that could bring with titles, I always go to my families first and say, I'm here for you. I am here to know you. Not what's in the record, not what I've read. Those are pieces, yes, of this journey, but I want to know you. And oftentimes I get a very different picture. I get a different response from what's been written. And so I try to explain through both modeling and my practice and trainings that we need to be able to take a moment before we respond in our automated ways and be real with your mindfulness, with your present moment, and say, what am I doing as a reporter of, let's say, child abuse and neglect? And is this actual child abuse and neglect? And who am I sending it to? Who's going to get it? How can this, what are going to be the ripples of effect of what my job is? Just as law enforcement, I get that we are driven and we work in spaces that have high demands and crisis circumstances, as we may say, but it is okay to take a breath and step back before reacting. And that's something that I've tried to learn myself, but also impose on others in working with them and gain from the systems, from understanding in these meetings that I have of what their role, what they believe their roles should be. Because I can have a different opinion at times, and when you have these intimate conversations, you learn a lot of what's happening and what is sustaining the long-term historical deficits of human evolvement, because it seems like there's patterns rather than new practices. Rather than being creators, we're sustaining what has been, or we are surviving. And so I'm trying to move from survivor to creator in everything I do, including with my peers.
Ooh. That was so powerful, so powerful. When we're thinking about surviving, movement to creating, but I'm just thinking about something you just mentioned, and I just jotted down. So, using explanation and modeling to shift practice, that's powerful. That is essential. I worked in the Connecticut area for decades, and child welfare. I've been the co-chair for the Regional Advisory Council for Region 4 in the Hartford area for a long time. So I've been in work with a lot of individuals across systems, across industry, across sector. And we're at the tables, and you're right, in terms of understanding how to communicate or what we're actually communicating, who we're communicating it to, and how it can be interpreted is so essential because they have
Absolutely.
some grave implications for
Absolutely.
families and for communities. So thanks again for that, Angelica.
And if I may add,
Sure.
one of my pet peeves is when they say, we don't, for example, we don't have foster homes, but policy won't allow us to get more in a quick way. I always say policy is made by people. It could be changed by people. Why are we complicating something that we are making? And it seems like we do use policies and bureaucracies as excuses to be closed doors. And I'm all about, well, what table do we have to sit at today? Let's create a changed policy. And I know that they complicate it at times, but I don't think it should be complicated. I think we can simplify some of this jargon and not have so many loopholes to make change, especially for the well-being of families and communities.
That's right. And Angelica, I couldn't have said it better. I am all for it. I'm in there with you. We can make the change. And where we think about political power or people will, people power, and so forth, as advocates, and again, back to being social workers, we have we have that capacity and ability. We have that within us, including within our code of ethics, right? So it's in our profession as educated, being educated in the field, but also a code of ethics, but also in who we are when we're representing the field itself. We can be the catalyst, we can, and we've spoken so often about being change agents, but for some reason, that is not necessarily the experiences of some of us in the community. And I think that's the piece that we need to really grapple with as a profession.
Yes,
And we're so needed right now.
yes, ma'am.
So I'm going to bring us to the space now where we're going to look at COVID 19, civil unrest 2020 and 2021, just to share a little bit about your perspective, the experience, and just anything you'd like to share there before we go to another segment.
Okay. I'm gonna share a story. I'm a storyteller, as you know. In 2018, after the last elections, and this is where I'm evolving as a human. I was very numb to President 45 of very to Donald Trump's presidency, and I started shutting down a little bit, trying to just, I didn't have words when that had all began. Not that many of it was new, but that was already a struggle for me. And so as time had gone by and evolved, and here comes 2020, I had stopped teaching at Western University, at the Western New England University. And I'm going to explain why briefly. And it's because I was in a circumstance where I was told our numbers are low, and so we take students that we're going to take, even if they were not able to grasp very key principles of my class on empowerment practices. So I had to make a choice and look deep within myself and say, am I being effective? Am I now being amenable to what goes against my values and what I want to do as a practitioner and educator? And I use the same skills we teach to say, this is no longer for me. It was a beautiful 5 years. Thank you. But no, this is not what I'm not gonna dumb down or water down information that is not only key, but it's essential to even going into the communities and working with my families, not on my watch.
Mm.
And while that was a difficult decision, and by wondering, do you leave spaces, Angelica? How do you then navigate spaces that feel that you don't belong, or that, is it about belonging? Is it about weighing it out? I will never know, right? Because it's a journey. And so I did make a decision that felt right at the moment. So I don't want to ever cause harm as a practitioner. And that's one awareness I've had. And so as I evolved in this Trump era, and I make changes to my life, 2020 comes, and I became very silent for a moment. And by silent, I mean I had to go inward. Some of my thoughts, when I saw the rhetoric being expressed, the conflicting information during times when, I believe it was March 2020, I was looking at Italy and the amount of deaths occurring. My first reaction, because I had never experienced such a trauma from this caliber, was I cried. But I still had a whole community saying things are going to be back to normal. And I don't know if I felt this sooner or too soon, or where we all were, because it's a journey. And I remember saying, what is happening? And then as it unfolded, what was started, what became many deaths and more, almost became normalized in our dialogue, in our talk. And now I'm speaking about CNN, I'm speaking about these news medias, I'm speaking about the greater world, and the whole, and then comments that were just egregious, to bringing solution, to bringing peace, and not creating hysteria in our country. I was thrown back, and I had to figure out. And one of my greatest learning lessons in all of it is, how do I not become the chaos and still be in the midst of bringing solution? How do I not become so worn out in the parts that are not working, and start looking at, so what are we going to do to work? Create a space within a space, to be able to have those small dialogues of empowerment without feeling like I'm always going to have to speak and give fuel to the war that's out there. Because I do believe we were in a racial war way before Trump was. I mean, we started with Trayvon Martin and a lot of young kids before our faces taken from us. And I don't understand that. I don't understand it on a human level, how this has occurred. It's continued to occur. And then with the pandemic, it only made it even more complex, because now you're hearing it's people of color in certain jobs, what they're adhering to, what they're not. We're hearing that we're putting all of our professionals on the line, but yet there's this other side of, I made a choice, right? I made a choice not to tell my country. I made choices, and it felt overwhelming. I'll be honest at first. And I had to get myself to be solution focused and say, this is not new, Angelica. You have been living in a world where gaslighting has occurred for a very long time. There are crimes against humanity that have occurred that have not been lessened in terms of solution. There's many of us out there, but once we get big or we get in touch, it seems that we get conquered and divided at times, or there's so much work to be done. How are you going to then regroup, work through your own healing, and then continue to connect? And so that process I'm still in, and as you can see in my piece that I shared with you, Inuksuk, right? When I'm writing about social work appreciation this month, I could have written about how tired we are and how much work we are, and getting ill, but I wrote about how amazing we have been, how we have risen up to the tasks before us. But in order for me to get that writing, I have to be in a space where I've had to rise up. um, I am quite this I am disturbed. I'll use the word disturbed at the rhetoric, at the lack of responsibility to humanity that we've had in public media, social media, in other spaces. And I do believe that it is because of the people like you and I. It is because of the people that we do not see in TVs, that we don't have access to in these devices of communication, that are making the changes of positivity and that are still striving and that are still giving hope to us, even when times seem very helpless. So I like to say helpless, but never hopeless. Um, right. And not even knowing how this pandemic was going to unfold, or it will continue to unfold, I had to remind myself in my own life experiences paralleled with this, that I come from a creator who every day holds me down. I had to go find my faith again strongly and say, I don't know what tomorrow will bring. We're creators. I don't know what the next moment will bring. So rather than falling apart in fear, let me trust the process and be the best I can at that moment, right? In my both healing and coming out process of what am I going to be? Who am I meant to be? Was my question to me during this time. Where can I serve? Where am I going to make an influence? And when I speak, let it be my greater purpose rather than just me from a closed-minded perspective. Um, but has it brought sadness and it's brought, you know, complexities? Absolutely. And without resources and without many tools, we still continue to move forward, in terms of addressing the populace, the masses that have been hurt by this. And there's nothing more powerful than one act of love than many acts that will go against the well-being of humanity.
Angelica, you mentioned regroup, work through the healing, and connecting. And I just want folk to really just listen and hear that. You mentioned that your voice, you found it was silent. You silenced your voice for a bit. You had to go inward, right? You regroup, kind of work through some of the healing, still going through, but connecting. And when we're thinking about going forward, if you can share just a little bit, 2020, many lessons learned, and you've alluded to some of them there. And I do know that when I had the conversation with you on Saturday, you were sharing some of the pieces about patience and love and just being gracious toward one another and how important that is right now, right? And that was so, I loved listening to you. I could just stay there and listen to you all afternoon as you were sharing, because you were speaking from your heart. This was not an intellectual conversation that we were having. We were on a different platform, different dimension, speaking heart to heart. And that is not something that is very much a part of everyday life for most people, right? We're trained to think and be cognitively aware and speak on an intellectual level and so forth. So this emotive or this heart thing is not the place for it. And we often always said to put that in this space and leave it over there. It doesn't belong in the profession, so to speak. And I beg to differ, and I know you do as well. And so let's speak just now a little bit about where you think that you have had the greatest impact all during this time, 2020 and 2021. And where do you think you will have the greatest impact, or you're planning? What's your thoughts about that?
So thank you for those words. I am mind, heart, and soul. I feel like first, one of the first advice that one person had given me, a lovely person, and sometimes we don't realize the impact when I started at 22 at DCF, was don't let them see you crying. It's a sign of weakness. And of course, I think in my own involvement, I can hear things, but I can choose to take them with me or not. Crying or emotional in a heart place is not a sign of weakness. I believe that if we are not in alignment with our mind, body, and soul, when we're doing this work with humanity, or with ourselves and each other, in our families, across these settings that we're all engaging with continuously, then we're not necessarily putting our true energies in. Um, and so this during this time frame, I have been able to grow in ways that I'm grateful for. I'm still there, because some things could get you and you're like, what? you know but I have been able to see others, and where they're at, whether it's that they're tired or frustrated, or there's no resources, so the answer is this less than well-being kind of response to matters, or we're not going to have this dialogue because there's not much we're going to. And I've been able to address those circumstances with kindness and put it into a perspective, thinking beyond the conversation, but the outcome for the child, the outcome for the family, the outcome for the community, and say, well, perhaps this can be done. Or I hear you, and I want to hear your rationale and whatnot, but can I now share what I'm thinking, and find my peace in that dynamic, where I'm then sharing what I'm hoping is solution focused information that then allows them to say, huh, okay, and then like giving the opportunity to letting them register what is that being talked about. It is a kinder way to respond to unkind things that has actually created more power in me. And it's like emotional intelligence combined with your own, those values, those ethics of humanity, and not letting any of it go. Because I know that others will approach me and say, tone down your social justice. That is, first, I cannot exist without my social justice. It is who I am. It's an intricate part of my own development. And so in my consistency in my messages, when I can also parallel love and kindness, even to those that may not be able to do that, because I'm understanding that they're programmed, that they're also stuck in their own boxes of what is right and wrong, which hasn't always been explored. It's existed for how many decades or centuries. When I see them as someone who can still be influenced or evolve, it makes it very different. And so I try to see people now not as my arch enemies, not as someone who is for or against me, but who they're embodying a space that I know there's room for dialogue and change. And how can we then have this dialogue where I'm not tearing you apart, I'm not trying to make you feel less than. In fact, on the contrary, I want to share with you a gift of who I am and where I see things, and maybe together we can even birth something different. And so it's that relationship building piece. If I'm going to work with you, I don't want to just work with you and get it out of the way. Little by little, we're going to intertwine and be interwoven. And I hope that goodness will always prevail above any act that might not be so great. Is that?
Wow, wow, wow. So I'm going to lift up parallel love and kindness, parallel love and kindness, loving it. So I'm just thinking about the fact that you're in child welfare. And we don't necessarily always hear things like this coming out of personnel from child welfare, right? So it's just great to know that you are in child welfare, that you are part of the department, thinking the way you think, and not just thinking the way you think, but also having the opportunity to train others when you go out and train them, and bringing that orientation outward and modeling all of that. It's just great to know that you're right there in the system, working on behalf of children and families, looking at different ways of how you can hear different perspectives, but making sure social justice related elements come in, equity related elements come in, and just knowing the humanity of it all. So thank you, Angelica, for that piece. I want
Thank
to
you.
quickly jump to one other question. It's really inviting you, although you've given me so many different bites here, inviting you to think of a quote or statement that, in the event, and hopefully it never happens, but we are in this world, in the event that crisis occur in, let's say, 2039, and they happen to look back on this recording and they hear something, what would it be that you'd want to share that can help the individuals that move from surviving to being creative and being creators of all sort of things and be able to be resilient? What is it that you can say to someone going through a tragic event in the future? What would that be?
So one of the quotes that I use often and that still transpires to that, it's that ripples of positive change can make a world of a difference. And I say that because I want us all to take a moment and breathe, all to take a moment and look at the many competing pieces, whether it's a crisis mode, the complexities of it. I can imagine, in the future, it's only going to get more complex unless we continue this change work. But that it's the one step, the one small act that makes the greatest of differences. And many small acts together become the tsunami, right? It becomes the tsunami. One drop of water becomes an ocean one by one. And to not think of perfectionism, because there is no such thing as being done. If we are creators, we're always evolving, right? There's no end result, there's no finality, but it's trust yourself to contribute and see. And that I don't like the word failure. I don't like the word failure, because failure for me is if we challenge ourselves and we're learning and it didn't go the way we imagined, then that's feedback. That's information to say, maybe if you wanted this, is this what you envisioned? Then let's try it that way. And so the idea of failure is not, to me, real. No one's a failure. If you're not making mistakes and you're not at the drawing board sometimes, then things gotten easy for you, right? It's taking a walk in faith, it's being a ripple, and then becoming, right, a collective. Because I am, but together we are, and that's powerful. And so ripples of positive change make a world of a difference and will connect you with whom you need to be connected in order to do that.
Wonderful, Angelica. I'm certain that will give so much encouragement to anyone now and in the future. Powerful words here. The one thing that I've asked all of my guests is around the Kwanzaa principle number 6, talking about creativity. But that's where you have been existing all of this time, right? So I'm going to ask you, but if you wanted to add something to it, is there anything that you're thinking about doing as you go forward? And it's around leaving our communities in a better place than how we find them, whatever that might be. So, what are you going to be doing over the next several months of the year? If you can share that. And then I'm hoping that you will share about any work that you're going to be doing in terms of your poetry, your open mic, or what you're going to have in place.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I saw about the question on Kwanzaa, right? The sixth principle. I always carry my Declaration of Human Rights with me everywhere I go too. Yeah, it's important, right? To keep it in a visual. And I went to Article 29. Everyone has a duty to the community. Everyone, right? And so I brought it there just as a parallel form. And so what I've been working on is this idea that I call the space. Art is a mosaic pieces. They come, they flow, and I've been writing for a long time now, since I was younger. I'll tell you this: at the age of 14, I was raised in the Baptist church here in Springfield, and then evolved in college into philosophy and this. And my life has taken from many different principles and beliefs. So I am like a mosaic piece of art. And my I was asked at 14 to do my first preaching at a youth service. And I remember being so nervous and saying, I needed to make sure that it's not about me, but how it's going to impact. God, help me, enlighten me. And I got the term of giving birth to from my spiritual mom at the time, Gina Alicia, who says to me, give birth to it, let it come to you, right? Just focus, meditate. And that was a new concept at 14. One, you're going to be in front of people. And the message that was born in me was a lighthouse. What kind of light do you want to be? A light that blinds or a light that shines the path? Because a light could have two very purposes. You could be a guider of direction, or you could truly be an obstruction with as a light. And since then on, it was a beautiful message that just grew in me. And I know that that was a big part of my speaking and writing kind of growth, right? That was my campground
Yes.
during those times as a youth. And so I created this idea of the space because I'm a very wordy. I have so much words, so much to say. And the space is it's a space for more spaces. It's this idea of a circle of having dialogues and conversations and people showing their arts and expressions in their draft forms. It's about what is the journey of your art, what's the journey of your expression, draft arts, where we don't wait till it's ever completed, because if not, like me, oftentimes I won't ever share because until you feel that it's a perfect piece. But that journey that goes within the piece of creation is truly a beautiful journey for many. And I think that's key to capture amongst ourselves, is not to be afraid to say, this is where I'm at. Here's my new stroke. Here's where my canvas looks like. Here's where my poetry is at. So the space is an idea of creating more spaces, coexisting, learning how to be kind, learning how to have dialogue amongst change and difference, and then letting, expression of self from many different parts. So that's my that's my project right now, my baby.
Wow.
Yeah,
Beautiful. Beautiful.
yeah. In terms of my vision for myself, I've always thought too, I've loved to travel. I like meeting people. So when I go, I'm not always in the touristic spots. I'm the one in the townies, seeing who people are, having conversations with the older folks, or the younger, whoever it may be. And so I would love to and desire to have a an opportunity to visit different spaces physically one day, and just share with other women in circles of just love, kindness, hear what their stories are and see who they are, and just be there with them, and gather that and see how we can create this movement of remembering humanity. I fear that with artificial intelligence and having to meet so many demands, I don't want to forget what it means to be a human being, what it means to have heart and soul, and that it's okay to sit and chat. It's okay. That's where you're going to get your most lessons, that it's okay to sit and ask. And so you've given me this opportunity, when in alignment with my vision of having a conversation with yet another stone in the path.
Wow. Wow. Angelica, thank you so much. I hear you lifting up a lot about the journey. And even in our conversation on Saturday, you mentioned about doing away with this piece about perfectionism and it being perfect. The process, being a part of that journey, it's all part of the work, it's all part of the development. And so, so many times, so many of us stuck in that space of, yeah, I'm going to hold on to it until it's perfect. But you're right, that time doesn't come because our perfectionism idea keeps it to ourselves, still feeling that it's not perfect enough for someone to judge it as being perfect, right? And so, us being locked into that, it relegates our work to a space that it's never seen sometime, as I mentioned. And we do want to do away with that because it's that creativity, that creative flow. Even the conversation with you may influence the next piece of writing that I'm doing or the next piece of the artwork. That conversation, that connection. And that's the beauty of having this element around the journey.
Yes, ma'am.
I thank you so much for sharing that. And
if
with
i
that,
if I can share with you, you know I've had a lot of colleagues during this time, and I think suicide is something that needs not to be pathologized but discussed and embraced more. It's been a topic, and as I continue to do self-work, you know I've had people who have been drawn to share their stories. And one of my writings I'm working on now I'm not sure if I'm going to call it rhetorical, but it's where do we think we're going to go? And it's not to challenge the idea of being in a space where death comes to mind. I don't want to challenge people in more than that, but I'm challenging myself to think further, which something that can be so common when we are in dark spaces or under these complex times or being running from brutality, right? That sometimes death seems like the answer, but I am challenging my mind to write a piece on, and it's a rhetorical piece that says, do we think we're going to go up into the sky and explode? I mean, what will be over when that time comes? And what else then for you? And so outside of any labels or religion, just exploring what is it that we want to end and taking that critical thought of saying, maybe that perhaps that's not the answer, right? That we still have so much to give even during these struggles. And so that's one, it's in the works, and I want to make sure that I give it that space and thought to create it, but really to just bring to some reality what a common thought could do for us, but in practice, what would that mean for you, especially because these are gifted people with treasures in them. And oftentimes our thoughts could be our worst enemies, and we have to question, we have to say, hey, little thought, who are you, where did you come from, did I get programmed somewhere, and am I feeling in relation to something someone taught me, something I thought about and believed.
Mm. Wow. I am telling you, I know you have to go, and I know we're going to wrap this up, but it's obvious that you have a lot more to share, and we need to just bring you back on this show. When we're thinking of critical thoughts, so creative thinking or designing, we can bring a group of folk together around arts and culture, which is essential right now, and have a dialogue around some of your pieces of work and their work. So
That would be
that's
amazing.
that's me extending in the future an invitation to you, and we'll put it together with other individuals. So let me just thank you once again, Angelica, for participating, for sharing your thoughts. It was really a platform for you to share, and so others can learn from you. Beautiful, powerful sister who is also a licensed clinical social worker, mom, advocate, powerful, creative individual. And we just wanted to give you that opportunity. So thank you
Thank
for
you so
coming on
much.
Around the World. I'm back with Dr. Alice Farrell. You get the last word, Angelica, so you go ahead.
Ubuntu, I am because you are. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Until we meet again.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. It was such a delight to meet with Angelica Rodriguez. The first time I met her, we just connected immediately, and it was via technology. This was actually the first time we're meeting in person, although still via technology, but all other communication were through audio, speaking on the telephone, and or through emails or messages. And I tell you, this sister has so much to share. Her insight about the systemic issues that negatively affect people group and individuals that are traditionally and historically been marginalized and disenfranchised. Her perspective on what needs to happen in terms of the work going forward. Um, Definitely not thinking around maintaining the status quo, but rather reshaping, redesigning, moving away from the traditional concept of what it is that we are supposed to be doing in any system places. And it's such a delight to know that, again, as I mentioned during the interview, that she is actually there in the child welfare system. Wonderful to have met her, and I am looking forward to seeing her work in the future. As always, thank you so very much for stopping by and listening to this show, Around the World and Back with Dr. Alice Farrell. I will be traveling to another place, and right now it's virtually. Looking forward to going in person to the various places that I'm interviewing folk from. I had the opportunity to be on a platform with some folk out in in the United Kingdom, in London in particular, and they will be coming on in an upcoming show. So please tune in again and take good care. Until then.